Hello everyone, and welcome back to Translationborne, the show where we talk all about the translation of Bloodborne. Last time we left off, we were faced with something of a gruesome scene. And I have to say, this person here looks kind of suspicious. Let's see what they have to say for themselves.
Whoa! Blimey, don't scare me like that. On a night like this, I took you for a monster. Oh, thank the stars, you're fairly normal. Was it you who put down that awful beast? Ooh, that thing had me trembling, frozen in my boots. And then you came along. Well, if you're a hunter, then would you know of any safe havens?
You still seem pretty suspicious to me. I'm gonna say no.
Oh yeah, of course not. I should have known. This whole place is falling apart once again. It's the curse of Yharnam.
Well, I guess maybe.
Oh, you again. You find any nice, cozy places to hole up in?
There is this creepy doctor who runs a clinic I know about.
Oh, I'll be. Thank you. It's about time I made a move. I can't very well stay out on my own. Oh, you're giving me hope. Terribly kind of you. Take this. It's all I can offer as thanks.
Sure, thanks for the blood that's known to attract beasts.
Thank you. It's about time I made a move. I can't very well stay out on my own.
So, this is actually a pretty tricky set of lines to translate. And I say that because of the nature of this interaction. This particular character is actually trying to deceive our player character here, meaning the words he speaks need to seem innocuous to a player who's just stumbled across him and isn't ready for this deception. Oh, and that's also why I'm attacking him right now.
Have you got a screw loose? Or is it your animal intuition? You hunters have got more blood on your hands.
So there you have it. If you choose not to attack this NPC and opt to send him to Erdin Chapel, he will end up attacking and killing other people you've sent there. It's a dynamic and interesting turn of events, with more clues as to who exactly the culprit is among the NPCs you sent to Erdin Chapel, should you have missed piecing together what's going on here. But it relies on that initial bit of trickery in order to get the scenario going. This means that one potential problem, at least if you take the perspective of someone who wants this beast's masquerade to work, is that players of previous Souls games will be on the lookout for the killer NPC in this game. Also, whether you're dealing with people who are on the lookout for this sort of character or not, the more obvious it is that there's something fishy about this character, the less likely players are to want to save him. And the reason I'm dwelling on this in such detail is because you probably noted that a few of the more literal versions of the lines the man had before transforming provided some greater potential clues towards his ill intentions. Recall that literally, his repeated questions about a safe haven are worded as places where everyone is taking shelter, and he emphasizes at least once that he feels like something's missing when he's alone. Certainly with the benefit of hindsight, these lines make it seem like he's eager to find somewhere he'll be able to continue to prey on people. In the official translation, on the other hand, both of these issues are made to seem less conspicuous. But hold that thought, I think he's getting frustrated.
Hunters are killers, nothing less. You call me a beast? A beast? What would you know? I didn't ask for this.
Right, but to finish the point I was making, some of the literal translations of these lines are potentially more revealing than the English translations ended up being. But given that part of the objective here is presumably to deceive players, I actually think this is a reasonable set of choices, although I can see why some might disagree. His post-transformation dialogue, on the other hand, I think most would agree has been handled extremely well. I love how if you do attack the man and reveal his bestial form, the official line references your animal intuition. It serves as a pun on the fact that he himself is a beast. It emphasizes the point that he goes on to make about how hunters are worse killers than any beast could ever be, and it serves to make us question how much of a beast our player character has become. Finally, you may have noticed that in my more literal version, the last thing this character says is one of those infamous unfinished sentences in the Japanese. He essentially says, "You know, even I," and just trails off. Here, my own intuition tells me he probably would have ended his line by saying something to the effect of, "Even I didn't want to become a beast." So I'm glad to see the official translation resolve the line in a similar fashion. Actually, one of the advantages to being on the translation team in cases like this is the ability to ask the developer for confirmation as to what this character was trying to get across. I'm not sure if that's what happened in this particular instance, but that is at least a possibility here. Anyway, whether they got to ask about this line or not, I especially like the "I didn't ask for this" wording they decided to go with, because it both emphasizes the tragedy of the situation and makes this person's fate resonate with some of the themes of the game. Remember that one of the key questions in Bloodborne is where exactly that line is between human and beast, and whether or not we can be said to have crossed over. Our own player character is someone who came to Yharnam, received a blood transfusion, and was thrust into the chaos of the Night of the Hunt. We didn't really ask to become a hunter either, and yet by this point, our own hands are absolutely steeped in the blood of beasts, and countless vials of the town's blood have been pumped into our veins. One of the things it seems clear they were trying to accomplish with the transformed man's dialogue here is to continue to blur that line, to make us consider things from the perspective of our prey. And of course, there's the tragic aspect and human cost to all this that it's meant to evoke as well. Really, I think the phrasing they went with here was well chosen. But let's move on. Student's uniform. Uniform of a student of Bergenworth, a past academic institution. The thick cape has been removed from this one. Bergenworth is the source of the healing church, and its influences remain strong in many pieces of attire in particular. Oh, how great would be Headmaster Willem's sorrow at the imitation of outward form rather than of knowledge or philosophy. So there are three main points I'd like to focus on with this particular translation, starting with a somewhat obscure translation choice that I think is interesting. In the line that I've rendered more literally as, Bergenworth is the source of the healing church, the Japanese term being applied is genryu, and this is a term that, to get even more literal, refers to a water source. Bergenworth is thus being called the headwaters of the healing church here, and that's the sense in which the word source can be applied. One of my Japanese to English dictionaries notes that this term is generally used to refer to the origin of something that has a continuous history, such as a language or a culture, and that certainly seems relevant here. Also, for me personally, the liquid nature of this connection calls to mind blood, at least in this particular instance. Of course, if this were simply to have been translated as source, some of the meaning would still apply, but that term is also generic enough that I don't think many people would make a connection to a river source in particular. Other terms, such as wellspring or headwaters, would sound unnatural, so I think the solution of the official translation, saying that the healing church has roots in Bergenworth, is especially elegant. Much like the original term, this references a natural point of origin that has led to the current state of affairs in a continuous fashion. It doesn't lend itself as well to an association with blood, but it does call to mind the forest that we're wandering through now, so there's still some potential tangible connection to the world of the game. Again, this is kind of a small point, but it's an aspect of the official translation that I appreciate, so I wanted to bring it up. In contrast, the second part of this translation I want to focus on is something I'm a little surprised by. You may have noted that in my more literal version, I said that Bergenworth's influence remains strong in many pieces of attire in particular. The official translation, on the other hand, simply says that the healing church naturally borrows heavily from Bergenworth's uniform design. The discrepancy I'm seeing here is that the Japanese seems to be emphasizing that it's in the elements of fashion that the strongest association can be made between Bergenworth and the healing church, whereas the official English merely points out the borrowed design. You can see the emphasis in the Japanese line where it says, その影響は多くの衣装にこそ強く残っている. Another rendering of this line that captures the emphatic nature of the ni koso there might be, that influence remains strong precisely in many pieces of attire. The Japanese seems pretty clear about this, so it's something of a surprise to me that the official version apparently brushes past this point, noting only that it seems natural that the healing church would borrow stylistic elements from its institution of origin. And this decision is made even more surprising when you consider the final line of the translation, which discusses how Master Willem would lament the current emphasis on outward form rather than knowledge or philosophy. Part of the point of emphasizing it's just in the uniform design where Bergenworth's influence on the healing church remains the strongest is to illustrate how it's merely the outer trappings of the original institution that have survived. But this actually leads into the final point I wanted to make, which is that despite what I find to be a somewhat perplexing choice leading up to it, I really like the official version of this last line of the item description. The entire line has been rearranged, of course, but the translation choice that sticks out to me more than anything is the use of the term pure pretension rather than the more literal outward form. After all, focusing entirely on the fashionable appearance of the Bergenworth student's uniform without any care for the thoughts that came out of that institution would indicate an attitude that valued pure pretension. It's also another way of emphasizing that the successors of Bergenworth have taken away the wrong lessons and hinting that they've become part of a cycle of degeneration. The end result, I think, is a great translation. Now, who are you?
Ah, a new face, are you? And an accomplished hunter, it would appear. I am Valtr, Master of the League. Members of the League cleanse the streets of all the filth that's spread about during the hunt. Like any half-decent hunter ought to, you know? Haven't you seen enough of these wretched beasts? Freakish slugs and mad doctors. Sentence these fiends to death with the help of your League confederates. What do you say? Why not join the League?
I'm gonna say no. You're kind of intense.
Yes, I suppose I should not force your will. But you are a hunter, and we'll see soon enough that on a night of the hunt, no, on any night, nothing out there deserves to live.
So for the first time in a while, we're meeting a new character who's actually got a number of things to say to us, not just now, but going forward as well. That means I think it's worth spending some time trying to get a feel for his voice in the Japanese and seeing how it holds up to the tone of the English translation. Thinking about this dialogue and looking at the Japanese then, the first thing that strikes me is that this is probably one of the few characters in the entire game that approaches us almost as an equal. Gehrman and the doll aren't even part of the same world as us, and one takes for himself the role of a guide while the other is a consummate servant. Gilbert is an infected man who we might bond with early on as a fellow outsider, but he's no hunter and is in the process of succumbing to disease. Gascoigne's family is obviously in a very different position than we are, and they ask for our help. Eileen is a fellow hunter, but she has a great deal more experience, and though she's welcoming, we later discover that she spends most of her time working as a hunter of hunters. That puts her in a position where, of necessity, she must stand apart and judge others. The blind man in Urden Chapel is meek to a fault. Iosefka and her impostor are both largely inaccessible to us and have different concerns. Ariana, the lonely old woman of Yarnum, and the bigoted old man are all people we need to rescue, not hunters. Adela is a nun of the Healing Church and is another person who we have to save. The mysterious man who lures us to the lecture hall is decidedly haughty. The transformed beggar is only trying to trick us to fill his stomach, and Jura is so obsessed with guarding the people of Old Yarnum that he tries to kill us. The other NPC we've met who comes the closest is probably Alfred, but for as welcoming as he's been so far, he ends up taking on more of the role of a mentor. He gives us a lot of information about the world of Yarnum, but has his own separate quest he's determined to succeed at. By contrast, Valtr is a character who meets us, recognizes that we're a fellow hunter, and a competent one, then invites us to join his organization. This attitude of welcoming respect is something reflected in his speech patterns as well. He tends to use informal sentence endings mixed in with a touch of archaic phrasing, such as his response when we refuse to join. He also comes across as someone with an intense demeanor who doesn't mince words. He talks in absolutes of expunging and massacring all that he deems to be filth, and the Japanese terms he employs, like konzetsu, koroshitsukusu, obutsu, and kegareta, tend to the extreme. He also makes a point of extending these beliefs to the player character and expecting our agreement. All of these points I think are well reflected in the official translation. You can see pretty much every one of these qualities in the set of lines that include, "Members of the League cleanse the streets of all the filth that's spread about during the hunt, like any half-decent hunter ought to, you know." Valtr is implying that we're at least up to his measure of a half-decent hunter. He's presenting his organization's activities as the natural course of action for all hunters, and soliciting our agreement. He's using strong language like cleanse and filth, and he later encourages us to sentence these fiends to death. You can even see some arguably archaic phrasing after we turn him down, and he says, "I should not force your will." So as usual, I think the official translation does a great job of rendering this character's particular voice into English, and I personally think the voice actor helps too. really gets across Valtr's intensity. Finally, very briefly, I wanted to say that I think the decision to have his final line focus on how nothing out there deserves to live, as opposed to emphasizing that everything out there is vile as excrement, is a valid translation choice. After all, in the mind of Valtr, these two statements are practically one and the same, and the official translation makes for a stronger and more memorable statement. But that's all the time we have for this episode. Once again, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for me, please let me know. Thanks for watching, everyone.